Coming up on Tech News Today, Apple fixes your broken Enclave. Tepid support from tech behemoths in the FBI backdoor case that's been happening the last couple of days. How Buzzfeed used.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com. Hi, everybody. It's time for our annual audience survey. We'd really like to hear from you. It helps us understand our audience better, know what you like and don't like, how you listen to the show. It also helps us tell advertisers what kind of people listen. But I promise you, your feedback is always kept personally anonymous. All you have to do is visit twit.tv/survey and let us know what you think. It'll just take a few minutes, and it'll help us make Twit even better. We really appreciate your support and any help you can give us. twit.tv/survey.
This is Tech News Today, episode 1452, recorded Thursday, February 18th, 2016.
This episode of Tech News Today is brought to you by Epson's new EcoTank printers. With Epson's line of SuperTank all-in-one printers, you can print thousands of documents without running out of ink. EcoTank is loaded and ready to print when you are. Visit Epson.com/EcoTank to find out more.
And by ZipRecruiter. Are you hiring? With ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100-plus job sites, including social networks, all with a single click. Screen, rate, and hire the right candidates fast. Try ZipRecruiter with a free 4-day trial now at ZipRecruiter.com/TNT.
Hello and welcome to Tech News Today. This is the show where we talk about the tech news with journalists and podcasters, and sometimes podcasters who are also journalists.
But always people
who are passionate
about technology.
I am Megan Morrone.
We didn't rehearse that, really. We didn't. I'm Jason Howell. The March of the Jasons is over. We do not have a Jason guest today. I mean, unless you consider me. I guess that means every day is the March of Jasons, as well as the March of the Megans. But we are very thrilled to welcome to the show Mathew Ingram, senior writer for Fortune. How's it going, Mathew?
Pretty good. How about you guys?
Oh, we're doing awesome. I mean, the Apple news just keeps on rolling in, so we're kind of trying to keep pace with that as it's late breaking right before the show. A few things slipped in there. We'll get to that a little bit later.
Will.
But people who are fans of the network obviously are you're no stranger to them. But tell people who aren't familiar with your work kind of what you write about at Fortune.
So I write about the intersection between media and technology. That's how I describe it. So it's a little bit tech, it's a little bit media. Some days it's more media and less tech. It seems some days it's lots of tech and less media. So, everything from cable companies to Twitter and Facebook. The nice part for me is sort of everything is media in a way. If it doesn't break when you drop it, it's probably media.
I like that.
Well, like I said yesterday, your show that you did with Leo and Steve Gibson and Jeff Jarvis yesterday, This Week in Google, was amazing about the whole iPhone encryption thing. That is a story that is going to continue, and we're going to talk in depth about it later in the show. But now we'll get to some of today's news. There's more secure Enclave news. There's now a fix for Error 53. A few weeks ago, we told you about Error 53. That's the message that some iPhone users were getting after their phone was totally dead. A brick. The error comes when you get your iPhone fixed by a third party, not an authorized Apple dealer, in a way that disrupts the link between the Touch ID fingerprint reader and the secure Enclave within the phone. Often this happens when you get your screen replaced. Apple has apologized for the error and offered a fix.
All I can say about this is if this had happened on Android, and this coming from a very passionate Android user, wow, this would have taken a lot longer. Like, I saw people kind of complaining, like, man, it took Apple forever to kind of do this. And I'm just thinking, oh man, like this is fast, man. Had this happened on the Android side of things, this would have taken months if you would have ever gotten an update to your device, just because there's so many hoops to jump through. I envy the fact that Apple can do this so quickly and just kind of push it out and be done with it, kind of wash their hands with it and walk away.
And so their argument was, like, we're doing this for you. Do you believe that, Mathew? Like, that it really is to protect the consumer from getting their Touch ID broken into?
Well, I mean, sure, I kind of believe that. I mean, I think that's probably one of the reasons. But I think there's probably other reasons. I have to agree with Jason, though. The speed of this is really amazing. I'm an Android user as well, and it shows you how, so having a single company control the entire platform end to end and everything on it has its benefits. The disadvantages, they get to tell you what to do. But the advantages, they can just roll stuff out like that, and it just happens just like that.
Yeah, I think we have the instructions, a link to the instructions. It's pretty simple. I mean, just go in there and I think you force restart your device. And if you're watching this, you can pause and then stop if you have a brick sitting around, an Error 53 brick sitting around. And if you didn't go to an unauthorized person to fix it, then it's under warranty. And if you did, then it's out of warranty. So.
But I saw somewhere that it doesn't re-enable the Touch ID.
I saw that too, that it doesn't. Yeah, that was going to be my question for you. Yeah, I don't think it works. But the Touch ID won't. It still won't work. So,
which makes sense. If that connection is broken by the repair, it'd be hard for Apple to restore the connection. Yeah.
And that's really what it's all about, is that verification.
And we'll talk more about that secure enclave. I love saying that.
It's a great term, isn't it? It makes you think about Pope or something. Secure enclave.
More secure enclave news coming up. But before we get there, a few weeks ago, Tom Wheeler, who's the chairman of the FCC, proposed an overhaul to the cable industry that aims to give customers the choice over which cable box to use for service. And today, the FCC has voted 3-2 in favor of the proposal. Now, Mathew, you wrote about this, and I'm very curious to kind of hear your take on this. Where do you side on this?
Yeah, I literally wrote that like an hour ago.
Yeah.
And so nice work there.
We do our homework. We try.
We follow you on Twitter.
Just went up. I think so. It's interesting to me that Wheeler, there's a number of levels to this. So Wheeler used to work in the cable industry. So actually a lot of people thought when he became FCC chairman, they were like, this guy's not going to go after the cable industry. And yet here he is basically throwing a bomb into the cable industry and saying, look, your monopoly over the set-top box is going away, whether you like it or not. And so naturally, the response from the cable industry has been less than pleasant. There's a huge coalition formed. They're trying to argue that this isn't necessary. I think he's totally right. I think, in fact, it's kind of a shame that it's lasted this long. His sort of comparison is you used to have to actually rent phones. You had to rent a physical phone when phones were new. I don't actually remember that. I'm not quite that old, but apparently you had to do that. And so his point was, it's a little like that. You have to rent this box. You pay for it many times over. It doesn't do a lot of the things you want it to do. So I think the opening up is good. Cable industry's argument is, well, we're already kind of doing that anyway. We've got smarter boxes, we've got apps we're working on, so just leave us alone and we'll do it. But I got to say, a lot of cable subscribers, I think, are just rooting for Wheeler here.
Yeah, I hate cable. I haven't had cable in years. I mean, I have Comcast internet, and they keep offering me like cheaper cable or free cable because you're and I don't want it. But does this mean that I can watch cable through my Roku or through my Apple TV? Is this what this is telling me that I can do soon?
Yeah, so theoretically, I mean, what Wheeler wants is just anybody can make a box and cable can go through it. It sounds kind of dumb, really. Why can't we already do that? Well, we can't because the cable industry hasn't allowed you to do that. So like they really, really want to. That's sort of their story. Yeah, we totally want to do that. It's really complicated. So you guys should just relax and we'll get to it. But we really do want to do that. And then they just don't do it. And so, but theoretically, you could just buy a box from Google or Amazon, or you could just run your cable through, I don't know, your Chromecast, who knows? But lots of potential there.
So this is saying that, let's say Comcast, use Comcast as the example, Comcast that I need to cancel my cable through, by the way. Keep putting it off because I just don't want to do it, but I do. So let's say Comcast, say this happens. Is there anything on the technology that kind of drives their DVR right now? Is there anything in there that's kind of proprietary in any way to where Comcast actually has to actively make their service able to talk to these other devices? Or is it just kind of already open at this point? It's just a matter of, them allowing other devices to be verified to use their network?
Well, there definitely are cable standards. I mean, there are all those boxes are proprietary. So Comcast and the other cable and satellite companies would have to go through a certain number of, jump through a bunch of hoops to sort of make that technology work with whatever box, whatever Google or Amazon or Apple device came up. Their argument is, and I think, to be fair, there is a point to this other than just, hey, we're big cable companies, we don't want to, give you what you want. Their point is, why don't we just keep going with what we're doing, which is creating apps that will then live on your Apple TV or on your Roku box or whatever, and then your cable will come through that. And so why should we have to do all this stuff with the box? Why don't we just move on away from the box? And I think the reason Wheeler's doing this is because waiting for the cable industry to innovate on its own is, it's like waiting for a glacier to show up.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, here's an update to a story we reported on Monday. The LA Times says the Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center has paid $17,000 in Bitcoin to hackers who took over its network for over a week. When we reported this on Monday, we reported what everyone else said, that they heard it was $3.4 million, which was $9,000 in Bitcoin, which seemed like a lot.
Seemed like a lot.
Like too much to ask,
yeah.
If you, for a hospital in Hollywood. But what do you think about this, Mathew? I mean, they didn't have a backup, I guess. That's why they had to pay.
Yeah, I mean, so the obvious kind of point there is you shouldn't put yourself in that situation. You should have backups. You should have redundant, systems in place, especially if you're a hospital. You would think that sort of protecting that data and protecting your systems would be pretty high priority. Mm-hmm. That's not to say you're not going to get hacked. In fact, I think you should probably plan on getting hacked and then think of the ways that you could protect yourself from doing that. Have a server you could switch to, have all your data backed up and so on. I kind of feel bad for them though. Like, I mean, what other options do they have?
Right.
They kind of have to cough up. The risk is like paying any kind of ransom anywhere. It effectively encourages these groups to keep doing that. One of my favorite stories, I can't remember exactly who it was hacked, but it was basically ransomware. You guys have heard of that, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. And so the responses from the ransomware company or whatever you want to group were super polite, and they actually went out of their way. They gave them a discount because they felt bad, and then there was a comment from the people who were hacked that basically said, great service from the ransomware company. And I thought, this is actually becoming a service. They got served by this company, and they were very polite, and they gave them a discount, and it just feels like a commercial transaction almost.
Strange.
Which is sad in a way.
Almost making them happy to hand over the money. Probably not actually, but
maybe not happy.
Yeah,
it could have been.
Kind of seemed that way. I mean, this is not the first and only time this has happened. And usually, like we've said, if the files can't be decrypted, if there is no backup of that data, like you really have no choice. Like you kind of have to cough over the money. When I first heard the 3.4 million, and actually after the show, as I really thought about it, I was like, man, if that is true, like the criminals behind that really didn't do a good job with this, because that's almost to the point where you start thinking, well, we just don't have that. So what are we going to do? Right. So seeing that it's the lower amount, that makes a lot more sense. There was a police department in Massachusetts that was targeted for ransomware actually a year ago. They ended up paying around $500 in Bitcoin to recover the encrypted data. 4 or 5 days of downtime there. And again, they didn't have a backup. So it all comes back down to that backup, I guess.
Yeah, but I don't want to say they were asking for it or anything like that.
You're never asking for it, but hey, backup is pretty darn important across the board.
Yes.
So hopefully.
Yeah. I know that feeling.
Yeah.
I have felt that personally.
Yeah.
So.
And then that will bite you in the butt. And then you'll finally realize the importance of it. I've certainly experienced that myself.
I think this also points to just how people don't really understand Bitcoin, too. You can see how it was going around. It was like, 'cause 40 Bitcoin is $17,000. That doesn't, it's like we don't really understand how Bitcoin works. You can see when like the doctor's saying, I was like, well, it wasn't that much. It
Only
was a lot.
40 Bitcoin?
Right. Like I must have some Bitcoin sitting
I think
around
I've got
here.
that in my wallet.
Are we supposed to bring it in a bag?
Are those like pesos where you 1,000 of them? I don't know.
Let's see here. A document leaked to TechCrunch points to your trusty Messenger chat app being infiltrated with ads sometime in the second quarter of this year. Businesses could send ad messages to you if you'd already contacted them previously using the app. Now, the leaked documentation does tell businesses to actually prepare now by striking up a thread with people in advance so that when the service launches, they have those contacts, those ad recipients, when the feature rolls out. And Facebook, of course, is not commenting on speculation or rumor, though TechCrunch says, it's a very trusted source. They have the documentation, and this is something that we can look forward to. So,
but we didn't get to see the document.
No,
TechCrunch didn't
don't
show
actually
us
get to see
the
it because
document.
it was gonna potentially be a little too revealing as far as the source. Facebook's mobile ads brought in 80% of the fourth quarter's $5.6 billion in revenue. And when you're talking about, Messenger having 800 million users reported in January, like this is just ripe for the picking. Like this makes so much sense. I'm not surprised at all.
Well, I mean, text message spam is like the worst. You remember the day when suddenly like you started getting spams in your text messages, with the first one. It was so annoying. Matthew, I don't think Facebook is going to do this, right? Like they're way too smart to just start spamming us in Messenger, right?
Well, are they?
In a way that would annoy us. I feel like the only reason that I use Messenger is other people use it, and so I think if we all, there's so many other things we could use, right?
Do you think there's a way they could do it that wouldn't be annoying?
Well, here's what I think. Maybe monetizing it. There's that Facebook M, like the chat bot, that you're supposed to, buy things. And, that way where it's sort of more sneaky, where it's like, oh, I want this, Facebook robot to help me with a vacation. And so it's like, well, you can go to these places that have already, bought this space in this chat.
Right.
Like, that's the way I think it's going to appear more, not as like, as blatant as the text message spam that we
actually, I wouldn't be surprised to see both. And this could very well be, this happens all the time. This could very well be a kind of trial balloon, document that's been circulated so that people can talk about a potential way of doing it. But I do think it is coming. Like you said, there's 800 million people. Messaging is becoming a huge part of the way we communicate. I mean, WeChat and stuff like that, these things are massive. And billions of dollars in commerce happens through those messaging platforms. That's what Facebook has its eye on. So will there be ads? Obviously. Will there be bots that are sponsored who you strike up a conversation with? For sure. Some will come from your bank and say, hey, do you want to deposit that check or something? All this stuff is coming somehow.
Well, the related story was Twitter now is going to make it easier for companies to direct message people on Twitter. I think that, there was going to be a link where I send a direct message, which I thought was interesting because, direct messages where you would want to, if you wanted to really work out a problem you had with a vendor, you'd want to give them your address and number, things you wouldn't want to do on Twitter. But the thing that makes Twitter, one of the things that makes Twitter great is that you can call out companies when they've done wrong on Twitter. It's not just sending, it's
and
like
then they get
finally.
right in touch with you, like, okay,
because everybody else sees. It's the thing that's horrible on Twitter, but great.
I thought the same thing because I've done that with my cable / telecom / everything company. And, they immediately were like, let us DM you. And I thought, of course you want to DM me. You want to take this out of the public Twitter and then so I can complain to you in private. But part of me did it because I know that there's lots of other people who are going through the same thing. And so it's not just that I want to publicly say, I want my company to bow and scrape to me. I want other people to see that they're responding and that maybe something is happening. So part of me doesn't want to take it to DM, unless I'm giving them my address or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
One question I had about this is if the rule is that the customer has to contact the business first, why are they asking businesses to create threads with their customers now? Isn't that kind of like counter to what the
You
plan?
mean the Facebook?
Yes.
Facebook plan?
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they want to create those links, as many as they can.
Before
and that's
that
kind of the irritating part.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the irritating part because you're probably going to get swamped with brands like, hey, just wanted to say hi, you're great. And then
hit me back, bro.
Right. So that later they can like send you all kinds of spam.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want that.
I don't want that either.
Thank you.
Well, speaking of direct messages, I got one today from one of the creators, one of the developers of the controversial app Stolen, and they are back. Now they're called Famous. Now, Stolen, of course, was an app that came out in January where you could own people on Twitter. You could buy and sell people on Twitter. You can see why it was not the best idea. It was a failed experiment, and one of those times when people got offended, maybe too easily offended, but the developer pulled the app right away, and then now they're back, maybe to waste your time. What I love about this story is just the progression and how they didn't give up. Now, The Verge says the creators got so much hate about their app, and you could see it on Twitter. People got really angry, as they are wont to do on Twitter. Zoe Quinn, who's a game developer, no stranger to hate online herself, part of one of the women that was really targeted in Gamergate, she reached out to help them and give them support. She basically, The Verge says, she said, hey guys, it really sucks that you're getting all this hate. I know what that feels like. Can I help you? And now she's a paid consultant on the game. So I just wanted to talk about this. I mean, I'm not saying this is an amazing app. If you want to use it, you can. It's invitation only, but the developer said use TNT is your code. TNT.
Oh, and
then you can get in, because you have to have a code to get in.
Is it TNT?
TNT. That's your code.
Okay.
TNT.
All right. Well, there you go.
So famous.af. I don't know, Matthew. What do you think about Stolen?
I love that it's famous.af.
I know. Yes. Right.
I like the URL. But to be honest, I actually don't. I was confused when they took it offline, because I didn't. Maybe I wasn't paying attention, but I don't understand why this was such a big deal. I mean, obviously, in fact, there was another service like that.
People.
I'm trying to remember the name of it. No,
was it buy your friends or sell your friends or something like that?
No, obviously there were more than just one,
Human
but-
Pets.
keep
There was
trying
also
with
something called Human
It's
Pets.
called Empire. No, Empire. Anyway, Cred bought it. KRED, the sort of clout clone. Anyway, is a long time ago. But so the idea was the same, except they called it investing. So you could invest in someone. And so I just don't understand. Like, obviously, you're not actually buying a person. And I suppose I could see if a famous troll who hated you and had made your life miserable started buying you, that would be bad. But I don't know. It just seemed like an odd thing to kind of get upset about. Maybe I'm not. Maybe it's like a microaggression, and I'm not hip to that. But it just felt weird to me that everybody got so upset about it.
I think microaggression is a good word. I think that, I mean, what I learned from the experience is, like, I was like, well, this is fun. This is silly. And, oh, wait, my experience isn't the same as everyone else's experience. Right. Some people are offended. They have the right to be. Yeah.
No, and that's fair, for sure.
So,
and maybe they could just get you, like, why not? Why didn't they have it so you could say, could you remove me from this thing?
Right.
Now it's opt-in. Obviously, that's going to reduce usage, it seems to me.
And strangely, in this case, I almost feel like it should have been opt-out. Like, I think that the way that the app framed things the first time as Stolen versus now, I think is what kind of changes that, right? Like, it was interpreted as, like a kind of inference to, let's say, slavery as one example for buying people and trade, and that sort of thing in Stolen. Now it's, are you a fan of, I'm a fan of you. And I almost feel like that's such a positive thing. Like, anyone would be okay with that. But I suppose they're doing what they're doing. They're reacting to, the very big backlash that they got. Twitter kind of already does this whole fan count thing. And this is based on Twitter feeds again, right?
Right.
Twitter does this.
Yeah.
It's your follower count. So you kind of already know how many fans you have based on how many people are following you. But definitely interesting to see how fast they turn this around.
Half of those are bots, though.
That's true. Okay.
So these are real. I mean, yeah, like when I logged in and, like, I got tweets this morning like, Megan Morrone, I'm your biggest fan. And I was like, oh, it feels good. Like, Twitter feels good this morning. I like this.
Also, it also kind of feels a little self-serving to, like, sign up to be like, I want people to tell me how cool I am.
Right.
So I'm going to opt into this thing, and then come on, people, tell me how awesome
you
I
can
am.
tell other people that you.
That's true. That's true. You can do that too.
Yeah. And this Empire thing, I still get emails. So-and-so has bought shares in you. And literally it was like 2 years ago or something. I don't think I ever even put myself on there. People just started. And it's just a weird, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, social stuff like that, it's fun for like 10 minutes. You guys use Peach at all?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I used it for longer than 10 minutes. I used it for a lot longer than most.
You were dedicated. Yeah, you were dedicated to it for a strong 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. Longer than most.
It's interesting that you say, well, this was around 2 years ago, and I think that was part of what was so interesting about this story too. The web is different now. It's a different place.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. And that's a good point. And I thought you made, I mean, you're right about sort of your experience not being other people's experience. And I continually get reminded of that on Twitter. I'm an old white guy, heterosexual. I don't get a lot of troll, and I mean, I get some, but not like some people do. And so for me to say, oh yeah, it's no big deal, you should just brush it off. Obviously, it's fine for me to say that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I find it fascinating too, just in terms of developing an app and what that involves. And I think I am impressed with these developers because I think, they walked in, like many developers said, like, we're going to create this game and it's going to be great. And then they were like, whoa, people took this.
It seemed
totally
like they were truly
different...
like thrown off kilter.
Yeah. And they didn't say like, you're wrong, you're complaining, you're whining.
That's a good point.
They pulled back. Now they have people that, have different experiences, have had different experiences on Twitter. They're paying them to consult on their app, and they're doing something new, and I'm impressed with that. And I think that is
commendable.
I think you're right, and we should definitely, we should give them props for that for sure, for sort of recalibrating and taking feedback instead of, we know what's right or what's good, and just shut up and use our app.
Yeah, exactly. And also what we're talking about, that, sometimes that limits the use. I mean, if you have to opt in and all these things are not, but maybe that's where we need to be looking. Maybe we don't need to have every person on the internet want to use our tool or everything. Maybe it's smaller groups is what we need.
Yeah. And I mean, this is happening that like Twitter is going through this, as you sort of suggested. I've had conversations with people. This is how, to non-Twitter users, this is going to sound like insanity, but about, should you put a period before the at mention of someone, or is that throwing it open to the crowd, and then trolls are going to form? And if you do a quote tweet, is that actually got called out by Chris Sacca, famous Twitter investor and multi-gazillionaire.
Oh, I saw that. I watched that. Yeah, I watched him call you out.
I think he said I was the quote tweet witch hunt king or something like that. And I thought, I don't understand what you're even talking about. Like, I quote tweets sometimes because I think other people might be interested in whatever this conversation is I'm having. Yeah. But I can see how people in some situations would think, wow, you're just calling me out and asking your troll army to come and jump on me. So it's all in kind of how you, and of course, that's not what I'm doing at all.
Right.
But I can see how it could be perceived that way.
Yeah.
I have a big following of bots or whatever, but so for me to say something might feel like, I'm waiting in there with all my crew or whatever, my squad, and we're we're going to jump on somebody, but that's not actually what it feels like, but it is to the person on the other end.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, and that's interesting too. I mean, because you think about the dynamic between Chris Sacca, someone, and you, and I thought, well, that's interesting. I mean, he was accusing you of being incendiary, I think, and on purpose. And I thought that was really interesting because I don't see you as that. And
and I do sometimes. I mean, sometimes I'll toss a grenade, or I'll post a quote tweet that's snark because I think something deserves to be, because I think the person who wrote it is probably an idiot, or the thing that they wrote needs to be criticized. But I don't know if I'm not supposed to do that, I'm going to have to start using Twitter in a completely different way. Mm-hmm. And it used to be, maybe when Twitter was smaller, it didn't feel like you were. So the comparison somebody made to me was, it's like you standing up in a football stadium and pointing at someone and yelling, this guy's an idiot, or he said something terrible. And in a way, I guess, if now that Twitter is so huge, maybe it does feel like that.
Well, after the break, we are going to get Mathew's take on all the updates to the iPhone encryption story. But first, let's take a minute to thank the sponsor of this episode, Epson. Epson's revolutionary EcoTank line of printers for home and office introduce a new age in printing. The new EcoTank ET4550 wireless all-in-one printer does not use ink cartridges. Instead, it features an innovative refillable ink tank. Comes with enough ink to print up to 8,500 pages. That is equivalent to about 50 ink cartridge sets. You're loaded and ready to print for up to 2 years. It's powered by Epson's leading-edge precision core technology. It delivers high-speed, vivid colors and laser-quality black text, plus auto two-sided printing, a 30-page auto document feeder, and easy wireless printing from tablets and smartphones. All EcoTank printers deliver an unbeatable combination of convenience and value with ultra-low-cost replacement ink bottles. Now you have the freedom to print without running out of ink. Visit Epson.com/EcoTank today to transform the way your home, office, or work group prints. For the best combination of ease and value, turn to the new Epson EcoTank printers. That's EPSON.com/EcoTank. And we thank Epson for their support.
All right. So another little block about the Apple security story that kind of started and took over our lives yesterday. Let's talk a little bit more about it here, because we've definitely had some things kind of bubble up over the past 24 hours. First up, Google CEO Sundar Pichai announced his support for Apple on Twitter. Let's just say it was brief. But I would say nice to hear at least something. And that dulled sentiment appears to be shared with other tech companies. Some are offering very delicate signs of support. Others offering a little bit more than that, actually, late breaking before the show. And then, of course, some are saying nothing at all. Up until a few minutes ago, Microsoft, Twitter, and Facebook hadn't really commented on it, even though this absolutely, in the grand scheme of things, affects them. Though they are part of the Reform Government Surveillance Coalition. And that coalition did offer a statement of support, not for Apple necessarily, but against the whole backdoor pursuit, let's say. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey tweeted like an hour ago direct support for Apple. It was very brief. Facebook released a statement to USA Today with strong support for Apple, saying it would set a chilling precedent and obstruct companies' efforts to secure their products. And Amazon isn't really talking right now. I think what I find interesting, though, is, like, I understand that because a lot, every company that I mentioned there has some sort, in one way or another, has some sort of stake in this in the long term. And I find it interesting that it took so long to get anything out, and that when it does come out, in at least a couple of the cases, it was worded not necessarily in a Apple, we support you, we've got your back. If we were there, we would be in the same position, as you, and we'd be doing the same things. Like Google's, for example. This is important, instead of saying something like, we support Apple. What do you think, Mathew? Do you think that these companies should be offering more direct support, or are they just kind of protecting their butts, staying out of the crosshairs in this?
Well, I think they're definitely, trying to hedge their bets. I mean, they've got to, think about not just what Apple's going through, but what's going to happen in the future. What could they be compelled to do? What sort of relationship do they have with security agencies? What sort of relationship do they have with the government? And so if they kind of, jump on Apple and say, yeah, we're totally with Apple and we resist every, attempt to do anything, that could cause problems for them in the future. I mean, part of me wishes they were a little bit less kind of mealy-mouthed, or whatever you want to call it, that they would say, look, we want to stand firm as an industry. And I think they're trying to do that, but it feels like in some cases their heart isn't really in it. And, there's another dynamic between Google and Apple. Apple has made privacy a huge part of its, unique selling proposition, unique sort of offering. So we keep everything private. We don't care about advertising to you. Obviously, Google is different in a way, not that it doesn't care about your privacy, but its whole business is based on knowing you and kind of tracking you, but asking you first, and then hopefully telling you what it does with your data. So I think Google's sort of views on not encryption and sort of the government hacking into your phone, but on sort of privacy in general is somewhat more nuanced than Apple's. Apple's just far to one end of the spectrum, and that's great. That's what Apple sort of users have come to expect.
Where do you think China plays a role in this? Because I mean, in some sense, Apple has just marched into China. They're selling lots of iPhones. They haven't had much trouble. Where all the other companies, the big companies, are having trouble because they're a different company. They run things differently, and they have to run up against. So now here's the thing. Where a lot of people are saying well, what happens here is going to also affect the iPhones in China. And so is what you're saying about Google? They're kind of sitting back and saying, well, Now you got to say something. Welcome to the fight. Is that what you're saying that Google's stance is here?
In a way, I think that could be part of it. Anytime China comes up, there's a huge amount of conflict in all the companies involved because they want to do business there. It's a massive, massive market, and all of China is sort of developing, and lots of people want phones, and they're going to want new phones, and so you've got this gigantic market, and yet you've got this basically totalitarian government and all sorts of kind of concessions that you would have to make, some of them pretty huge, in order to do business in that country. And so anytime you're kind of, Leo mentioned this actually in the discussion we were having on Twig, that, Google and Apple both want to do business in China. So they kind of want to have their cake and eat it too, in a way. The risk in this particular case is if, depending on what Apple does, and I think that in part this is why the FBI is doing this, that precedent is going to be heard around the world. It's not just going to be something that applies to a phone in the US. And so, everyone in China is going to be watching. Chinese government's going to be watching. Mm-hmm. They're going to use whatever happens as a way of sort of pushing their own agenda, which is to be able to get into people's phones and watch what they're doing at all times. And how Apple deals with that, or how Google deals with that, that's going to be a tough one.
So what do you make of the internet rights groups that, the group, internet right groups Fight for the Future, that they were protesting outside of the Apple Store? What do you make of that?
I think it's great. I think protesting is great. And, I would like to see a bit more kind of regular users and people getting involved. I'd like to see a bit more, and maybe this is part of that. Maybe that's what they're trying to get going. It feels a little bit like, Apple and the FBI and a couple other tech companies are going to figure out what happens here. I think we all have a stake in that, right? This is going to affect us in some way, even if we don't even have an iPhone. Yeah. It's probably going to affect us. And so I kind of would that's why I feel it's so important to sort of boil down what's going on and try and explain it to people, and maybe not have to use terms like secure enclave and, on chip encryption.
As awesome a word as enclave is. Yes.
Yeah. Secure enclave sounds awesome. And I would like to have one in my house, but to try and just get at the sort of root issues. And obviously one of them is, the authorities need to get into this guy's phone because he committed a crime. But the potential ripple effects of that are so huge. Mm-hmm. It really is mind-boggling. It's just hard to boil down sometimes.
Yeah, you work for a pretty mainstream, publication. Do you feel? I feel like I'm in this bubble of people that just love and care about and think only about technology. Do you feel like normal people are talking about this and understanding this?
In my sort of limited experience, no. So civilians, as I like to call them, haven't
Muggles.
Really, started coming up to me and saying, "Do I have a secure enclave?" Or I think they're. I think it is going to happen, though. It is kind of leaking out into the normal world, and it will become an issue. So the hard part is how to kind of frame it in a way that makes sense to people. And you find yourself falling back on kind of real world analogies like, well, imagine there's a lock on your house, and mm-hmm. other houses have a similar lock, and so. And the master key and so on. And in a way, it's actually way more complicated than that. Yeah. But, but sometimes you have to sort of get out of the abstraction to what it's going to mean to people who just own phones.
Well, I might be putting you on the spot here, but how would you explain it to someone? Like for the people, how do we explain it to the muggles in our life, the normal civilians in our life?
I guess I would just, I have explained it as just, the FBI wants into this phone. Certain things on the phone are preventing it from doing that. And so in this case, the FBI wants, well, a court has ordered Apple to alter the phone so that the FBI can basically crack it or hack into it. And that's, you know, in a nutshell, that's kind of what we're dealing with. The risk is, if Apple does that for this phone, maybe it could be done for all sorts of other phones. And if they create something that modified OS for that phone, who's to say it won't escape into the wild and then give lots of people, including bad people, the ability to get into your phone?
Right before the show, Anthony Nielsen here at Twit sent me a link to some news that Senator Richard Burr, who's the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, is apparently drafting legislation to criminalize the refusal to cooperate in basically aiding decryption for an investigation of this type. I don't think that it necessarily calls out, well, as it wouldn't, Apple specifically, but it's directly tied to this. So, you know, who knows the influence of this over time, but that's happening as well.
Well, do you
and
think
that's a hugely frightening development,
Yeah.
right? Like that would be a hugely, it feels a little to me like there are certain forces within the U.S. government and the military establishment who want to make it effectively seem either illegal or just bad to even use encryption at all, to even use any kind of privacy, you know, enhancing software. The simple fact that you use Tor, for example, basically is like a red flag for security agencies. Why are you trying to cover up your web activity? Clearly, you're doing something wrong. So, you know, even the fact that you're using that, I think they want to make that seem like it should call into question your patriotism or whatever, which is a frightening development.
Mm-hmm. Or the argument that everyone makes, look, I don't do anything wrong. Why do I care if Apple, I don't have anything to hide on my iPhone. I don't care, you know, and it's interesting. I have a good friend who, you know, is a civilian, and, you know, it was surprising to me because she brought up Serial, you know, the podcast, where I think that's where you know, it reached people that, you know, you can be wrongly accused, you know, people are upset about the miscarriage of justice. So I think sometimes framing it that way, like you never know what something you might have said might imply that, you know, you did something that you didn't do. So it's interesting. I mean, we talked a little bit before the show, Mathew, about the iCloud backup. So this phone, apparently I've read that the FBI does have some access to some of Farouk's iCloud backups from his phone, but then maybe he's turned that off. I mean, this is sort of an example. This is kind of another thing. This isn't really about this phone, and this isn't really about San Bernardino, and it isn't really about, you know, it's bigger than that. But what is can the FBI like just look into, you know, iCloud backups? Do they need a warrant for that? How does that fit into here?
They do need a warrant, is my understanding. So, but it's not any different than it's, you know, those are relatively easy to get. We have reason to believe XYZ is happening in this iCloud backup, so, or information that we need for this case. And then they would get access to it, as they have in this case. They have access to at least to multiple backups, and then at some point they stopped. And that's why they are trying to get into the phone. I don't know this, obviously, but I actually believe that in a way, that is just a justification for trying to force Apple's hand and allow the authorities to do this so that they can set a precedent. Because there have been multiple requests made to Apple, like dozens, that are very similar. And in every case, Apple has resisted. And so I think someone said, look, we got to have a test case. And this is a good one. It was a horrible crime. And we need to force Apple to do it so that then we can say, look, you did it in this case, you should do it in this other case.
And do you think if some people suggested that Apple had a hand in this also, that they want a precedent just like everyone else because, you know, they need to know how to deal with this also, that they, like there's, I think Bruce Schneier said that it sounded like Apple participated in the wording of this because so it would be more, it would set a precedent and not just get wound up in someone's getting the technical issues wrong.
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants their own precedent, right? Apple wants, this is why people push cases to go to the Supreme Court. Everybody wants the definitive ruling, but they want the one that they want. not the one. So Apple wants it to be a definitive ruling that they don't have to do this, or that they have to do it in such a cumbersome way that it won't happen every time, or it'll be harder, it'll be easier to resist every time. And the FBI and other agencies want a sort of precedent that says we can get Apple to do this whenever we want.
Well, let's read an email we got from a viewer, Matt Schultz. He's from Chicago, where he says he's no stranger to political machinations. Matt writes, it seems to me that the FBI is playing the long game, not just in trying to change Apple's stance on encryption. This is a great point that Jason raised, but to scare smaller companies. If the FBI is able to force Apple to create a custom OS, then imagine the impact it will have on smaller hardware companies who are thinking of following Apple's lead in creating encryption without backdoors. Will any smaller players be willing to institute such encryption when the financial implications include defending themselves in court and creating custom software on demand? So what do you think, Mathew, that will this have an effect on smaller companies? I mean, my first instinct here was like, well, they're making an example of Apple because they're not a small company. But what do you think? Will this have implications for smaller companies as well?
I think it's going to have implications for everyone. I think it's going to have implications for governments, in other countries. It's going to have implications for users in other countries. It's going to have implications for companies that have anything to do with encryption. Because, Apple, and in a way, I guess Apple sort of forced this to happen. They upped their game in encryption by saying, look, we literally cannot even get into your device, cannot even get at the stuff. So, they up the ante in a way. And so the risk is that depending on the decision, the way that encryption is handled legally is going to change substantially.
Yeah, almost like their kind of push in such a heavy sort of way towards where it is right now could potentially lead to what everybody fears, which is that kind of stronger lockdown, broader kind of implication of this, as opposed to if the request is in line with other requests that have been made in the past, and the request really was just about one single device. Now it's opened up to a much broader definition, basically based on how Apple has framed it.
I think they're hoping that, and they could do this. This is one thing that Steve Gibson mentioned. I think if Apple says, look, we can do this and we will do this, but we will only do it for this phone, and we will have to have physical access to the phone to do it, then they have a plausible case to say we can't do this on a widespread basis, and we can't do it on a sort of wholesale basis, and we can't give you a key, a sort of master key, but we can let you into this phone, and we have to have physical access to it. And then the next time it happens, if it's China or whoever, then you have to get the phone, you have to do the physical thing on that specific phone. That at least is going to restrict it a bit more than here's a way of getting into any iPhone anytime you want.
Well, I said this yesterday, and I'll say it again. I just think it's great to open up this discussion. And I think it's the same thing you're saying. Like, more people should understand this and kind of figure out and have a discussion about what our rights are and what the government's doing versus what the technology companies are doing.
It's interesting. I was going to mention, I don't know if Fingerprints came up, but the last ruling I saw, which I think was in Virginia, so not a higher court, but that judge ruled that if your phone is protected by a key code, the police cannot force you to unlock it. But if it's protected by a fingerprint, they can, which is interesting because everybody thinks the fingerprint is better security.
Right.
But in this case, it actually made it easier for the police to argue that they should be able to force you to unlock it.
Well, and that's fascinating
in this case,
too,
of course,
because
the guy's dead, obviously, so fingerprints
but,
don't work that well.
Well, but depending on how fast they get to it. Now, Apple, the iOS devices do have a timeout. So basically, if you haven't used your fingerprint for, I think it's like 48 or 72 hours, somewhere around there, then it'll force a PIN. So if they acted fast enough, and they had, let's say, a body with a fingerprint. And I've kind of thought about this too. Now, mind you, this doesn't apply here because it's the 5C. It doesn't have the fingerprint as part of it. But if it did, the FBI, they have plenty of fingerprints. You know what I mean? They don't necessarily. Do you necessarily need an actual finger in order to register a fingerprint. I wouldn't put it past them to be able to take what they already have and be able to replicate that onto a Touch ID. Well, so I don't even know if you need the finger in order to do the fingerprint.
They did it in Mission Impossible, so I'm sure they could probably do it.
Of course. Well, yeah, I mean, the password versus the fingerprint is so interesting, too, because, I mean, the ruling there is like the password is your thoughts, your what's in your brain versus the physical thing. And, I mean, when you think about it that way, it's really like, yeah, they don't have access to what's going on in my mind yet.
Not yet, anyway.
Someday.
It's probably
They're
good they don't have
towards
access to what's going on in here.
All right, fascinating stuff. Coming up, we're going to take a look at the way BuzzFeed tackles its data tracking that makes up its business. But first, and it's actually a lot more interesting than that makes it sound. First, let's take a minute to thank the sponsor of this episode. That is ZipRecruiter. If you're hiring but you're not sure where to find the best candidates, if you're a business owner, your company is only as good as the people that you hire. You already know this. Posting jobs in one place isn't enough to find the quality candidates, the people that you're looking for. Short staffing leaves little time to post to a dozen job sites. You don't want to have to do it yourself, and maybe you have to, and then you know the real pains of this. No one has time to do all that heavy lifting. Post everywhere, track the postings, update as needed in a million different places online. We need help. And that's where ZipRecruiter comes into the picture. Thanks to ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100 plus job sites with one single click. You'll be instantly matched to candidates from nearly 6 million resumes. You just post one time, and within 24 hours, you'll watch the candidates just kind of roll into ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use interface. All appear there, and you don't even really have to do anything. There they are, making everything easy, making your job easier. ZipRecruiter has been used by over 400,000 businesses, and you can try it now for free. Check it out for yourself. See what you think. Getting the right people for your company is so important, so you should check it out. Here's Scott, a happy ZipRecruiter client. He had this to say about ZipRecruiter. He said, the recruiting process used to be so painful. Before, I'd post to several places, get 1 million resumes, but only a few responses from qualified candidates. It was torture, but with ZipRecruiter, we posted once and get qualified candidates in one easy-to-review place. We've hired some of our best employees using ZipRecruiter. It worked for Scott. It'll work for you, too. Today, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. Go to ZipRecruiter.com/TNT. That's ZipRecruiter.com/TNT and check it out for yourself. And we thank ZipRecruiter for their support of Tech News Today.
Now it's time for the TNT Fan of the Day. Remy Oxenfan sent us a few different views of how he watches TNT in his new kitchen. It's a very nice kitchen.
Ooh.
Nice backsplash, huh?
You just learned that word.
I just learned the word backsplash, that thing by the paper towels that I was telling Jason I could never redecorate anything. And people have discussions of backsplashes.
The only reason I know that word is because, like I said, I need to cancel Comcast. One of the reasons is because HGTV is like the only thing that's ever on when we ever do turn on the TV. I hear the word backsplash a lot, and it's kind of depressing.
It's a decorating show.
Yeah.
Show us how you watch the show. Record a picture, record a video, take a picture of yourself, your setup, post it on Instagram, Google+, Twitter, Facebook, Peach. Use the hashtag HowIWatchTNT, and we will find it.
We haven't got one of those on Peach in a while.
No.
Finally, Mathew, you wrote a piece a few days back where you shed some light on BuzzFeed's success in light of its being an online property that so many people just kind of take for granted. I know for the longest time I've taken it for granted, but they've got some really cool stuff going on in the news front, let alone all the other stuff that everybody knows about BuzzFeed from being kind of like a viral, sensation, place where all the viral stuff happens. Why is BuzzFeed getting such an unfair shake, do you think, Mathew?
Well, I think because there's a disconnect in a way between the content that most people see and kind of associate with BuzzFeed and the company itself. So in a way, it's a little like Facebook in the early days when people thought of, throwing sheep or poking and they thought, man, Facebook is a joke. Mm-hmm. But even then you could see kind of the potential and the sheer size of the network was fascinating. And the way it was changing. And that's kind of what BuzzFeed feels a little bit like to me. So people see, 11 GIFs that explain the revolution in Egypt or something. And they think, well, this is dumb. It's obviously a joke. The dress, got huge traffic, but did it change the world? Not really. But I find BuzzFeed, the company, is fascinating in part because it's a totally kind of brand new sort of web animal, right? Never had anything to do with print, never had anything to do with sort of traditional media. And so it's a creation of the web in a way, the social web. And Jonah Peretti, the guy who runs it, who started it as kind of a lab just to fool around with, probably understands how content works online better than anyone that I've ever met, certainly. The way it's shared, why it's shared, the way it flows, how it moves from platform to platform. And BuzzFeed is kind of the poster child for the distributed media phenomenon. So I think in that, the profile that Fast Company did, they said over 75% of BuzzFeed's content never appears on its website. Over 75%. Wow. That's fascinating. So all of that stuff is appearing on Facebook or Pinterest or Tinder or Snapchat or things I've probably never even heard of, Peach. And so, and it lives there. And it's not just designed to drive traffic back to the website, which is what most media entities are thinking of. So I'm constantly, it's like talking to people who live in the future or something, or, you know what I mean? Or people who live on a different planet. Like the way they sort of think about their content, I find fascinating.
Yeah, when they look at and they describe the machine, machines behind this, the data and everything, really, I mean, the idea of sharing is so interesting to me because it used to be like your mom would cut out an article for you from the newspaper and mail it to you in college. Yes. And, now it's like, I mean, because what we read, like what we sit down and decide to read is really different than what we share. And not just like share with our family by email, but what we share on social media. I mean, and I think they've figured that out. I'm probably, if I sit down and read an article about these are the 10 cutest dogs you'll see today, I might read that. I probably won't share it on Facebook or Twitter or anything like that, because I'm, that's where it's sharing is something different. And I think they get that. They get it, like the emotions behind that, like
definitely,
and it's so emotional and it's really fascinating. Your piece is really interesting. If anyone hasn't read it, they should definitely read it and read the Fast Company piece on it too. And yesterday we were talking about Yahoo, like, Yahoo closing all these verticals. And we kind of were talking to each other, like, what happened here? Why does no one care about what Yahoo has to say? And I think they really, and it's weird that Yahoo didn't get this because they've been there. I mean, they were the first search engine. They had access to all this data, but there's something just missing in their content that BuzzFeed found and, uses to.
Well, and the way they think about their content,
it's
right?
Old
It's a totally
school
different
philosophy.
Yeah.
Right. It's a totally different way of thinking about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I find sort of reading these things from BuzzFeed so fascinating. It's all of the ways you think about your content and what it's for or who's using it and why. And you could, there are downsides to looking at sharing as the number one sort of motive. People share things for all sorts of reasons. People will often share things they don't actually even believe because they want to portray themselves in a certain way. There's a hugely complicated psychology behind sharing. People will share the most horrible racist stuff because it strikes a powerful emotion in them. So that powerful emotion can be good or bad. That's how mobs form, for example. Mm-hmm. But so it's not that, BuzzFeed has invented the way that media should be, but certainly the way they're thinking about it is very different.
Yeah, they today actually BuzzFeed posted about how the company thinks of its data. It's a very interesting piece. It details kind of all the metrics it uses to track its success, content views, regardless of platform, and that's a huge component of this. Like you were saying, there are a lot of platforms. Monthly hours spent, and that the reason for that is because that's a metric that no matter what platform you're looking at, it's a universal.
Go down to the graph.
Keep scrolling. Monthly
Look at that.
Yeah. So you got 6 billion. Wow.
So BuzzFeed.com and apps is this tiny red line, not tiny, but that's their site and all their apps. Mm-hmm. And then everything else is video and distributed
which they say distributed. The spike was so huge, they're not going to reveal the number, being a little cagey with that one, apparently.
It looks like it was probably 10 billion.
Yeah, right.
But 5 billion video views, that's a business that didn't exist 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That's mind-boggling.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty crazy. What do you think, what kind of lessons can a company like Buzzfeed, with what they're doing here, what kind of lessons can they teach other companies in the online content space, do you think?
Actually, that post you were mentioning, one of the best points sort of comes up top. The idea that you should constantly be reevaluating what you're measuring and what you think is important. You know, there are still sites and publishers, I won't name any, that are focusing on page views and even unique visitors. What BuzzFeed is saying is even that metric is going away. That's one some people literally just got accustomed to. So it's the rate of change in the media environment is unlike anything we've seen for 100 years. So you kind of constantly have to be rethinking what you're doing. And the hard part is, as it points out in the article, the publisher points out, it's hard to do that because the things you used to do were how you got so successful in the first place.
Yep.
And now you basically have to throw them out and find new ways of doing them, or you're going to die.
Right. I mean, look at Snapchat. I mean, and there was a BuzzFeed article last week. It was like, you know, a 29-year-old having his teenage sister teach him how to use Snapchat. And it was like, it was fascinating to me that like, oh, a 29-year-old, who I think of as way younger than me, because they are, doesn't understand Snapchat.
Imagine
like that's how fast. That's how fast everything moves, right? Yeah. Like a 29-year-old doesn't know where people are consuming their media. You know, a 29-year-old that writes for BuzzFeed doesn't know that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's in the headlines. We'll make fun of them, but they are great, and they're not as clickbaity as some other headlines. I mean, there's a lot of places that are worse. They're not as mean-spirited. I mean, they're not Gawker. Like, they're not trying to just, appeal to our lowest desires in order to get us to click on them either. So it's really fascinating.
And that is one of the points they were making was in the Fast Company profile was it's not clicking that they care about. Right. You know, lots of sites just want you to click so you can go there, and then they can count that as an impression and sell ads. What BuzzFeed wants is sharing. That's 10 times more important than just clicking.
Well, and a big part of that too is conveying that to whoever the advertisers are, because there's also kind of an ingrained expectation on the side of advertisers of what success is defined by.
Yeah.
And that's redefining it for them as well.
Yeah.
And in fact, their whole sales pitch is we understand content and how it functions. And so we can basically make your content do that, except your content is called ads and our content is called editorial.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, Mathew, thank you so much. I could talk to you for another 3 hours, and
but we won't. Only another 2. And we'll let you go.
Thank you so much for coming on. We talked about a couple of.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
We talked about a few things that you've written. Is there anything else that you have up or that you have coming that you think people should know about?
Lots of great stuff coming. I mean, it changes from day to day. So just best thing to do is just follow me on Twitter. At Mathew I with 1 T, and if you have something interesting going on, reach out. I'm always happy to hear about it.
Right on.
Or people can become your biggest fan on famous.af.
They sure can.
If you opt in.
If I don't get there first.
But if he doesn't opt in, just follow him on Twitter at Mathew I with 1 T.
Or I'll make a fake Twitter account for Mathew and then make sure I'm.
I suppose you could do that.
There's a fake Mathew I.
Okay. Excellent.
All right.
Matthew, it's our pleasure having you on. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right. See you later.
Take care.
All right. Tomorrow's awesome guest will be Mike Murphy from Quartz. TNT records live every Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, 12 a.m. UTC at twit.tv/live. You can always take part in the show. We'd love to hear from you. Please email us tnt@twit.tv or leave us a voicemail. Keep it short. 260 TNT Show. You can also hit us up on Twitter. We are at Tech News Today TV.
You can subscribe to our show at twit.tv/TNT. That shows all the ways you can subscribe to the audio or the video in any podcatcher of your choice.
Or the audio and the video, both of them.
But not just the video.
Depending, we don't have that feed yet.
No. Although some people might want it. I don't know. You can also subscribe to the Twit newsletter at twit.tv/newsletter. And if you want to tweet at me, I am at Megan Morrone. And I also, sorry.
You also
Someone
go.
just tweeted at me because I was asking for DMs, and I accept all direct messages. I might be sorry I do that, but I've got them turned on. So you can DM me if you don't want to publicly tweet at me.
I can't remember my settings, but I'm sure they're public. We'll see. I'm at Jason Howell on Twitter. You can test it by DMing me.
I'm going to do it right now.
Thanks to our technical director, Caracol, and all the folks who help us produce this show every single day. Thank you. And thanks to you. We'll see you tomorrow on another episode of Tech News Today. Bam!
That one hurt.